Good morning and welcome to APA's first ever entirely digital NPC20 at home. It's our very first digital conference. And I have some exciting news for you today. We have sold out this event and we have more than 5,000 people registered for the conference. What an incredible turnout. As president of APA, I can't tell you how happy I am that we're able to connect in this way during this extraordinary time of COVID-19 pandemic. We have lost planners. Let's share a moment of silence to show our respect for everyone who has been affected by illness, who has lost a loved one, and for all of those on the front lines of community response and health services. As we begin, I want to convey my deepest appreciation to the hardworking volunteers of the National Planning Conference Committee. The group has been chaired by Paul Ingram, who's provided committed leadership. And Paul also happens to be a newly minted FAICP fellow. So congratulations to you on this achievement, Paul. All of these people worked for months to develop an incredible, robust program for NPC20 Houston, and then quickly pivoted with us to recast that experience into a new digital format in the face of the shelter-in-place orders. To all the committee and subcommittee members, to all our loyal volunteers and APA Texas chapter for all their hard work, and to the amazing APA staff who made these next few days possible, my heartfelt thank you. We are also grateful to our conference sponsor, General Code. We appreciate your supporting this pioneering event. Today, we will be having a candid conversation with my colleagues, Joel Albizo, CEO of APA, and Silvia Vargas, chair of the APA's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, who is also a recently inducted fellow into the college, AICP College of Fellows. We're going to go right to the heart of what's on every planner's mind today as we face a very uncertain future. And while no one could predict what the world will look like, I'm here to tell you that two things are not going to change. Number one, we're going to maintain the same values as planners that we've championed in the past. The realities of post-pandemic world may push us in ways we never imagined, but our focus and driving mission will continue to be creating great communities for all. Number two, APA is here to listen to you and navigate this journey with you, providing the new level of community and support you'll need to thrive in a very different environment ahead. On that note, I'll invite Joel to share his thoughts. Joel?
Thank you, Kurt, and welcome. We didn't expect to be meeting this way, but we're so glad you're able to join us at this extraordinary time in our lives and in the lives of our communities. As Kurt said, putting this together in a few weeks was quite a feat. It was a great team effort. But what it demonstrated most is our team's ability to adapt to fast-changing circumstances, to make sense of it. This, combined with our ability to thoughtfully observe what's happening around us, and to draw on our community's knowledge, skills, experience, and values, this will help us get through the tough months ahead and help us to emerge stronger and more impactful. Over the next 3 days, you'll hear a wide variety of insights and ideas about planning in the pandemic and beyond. They'll be sobering, but hopeful. Most importantly, they'll provide a practical path as you navigate the most extraordinary time of your career. I've learned that planners are exceptionally creative, resourceful, and determined problem solvers. What might seem like an insurmountable challenge to most is just an important problem to be solved, often one small step at a time. I've learned that you're not just a resiliency profession, you are a resilient profession. And it's in your DNA to learn, to grow, to evolve, and change our communities for the better. And that is essential work. Thank you for joining us. No matter where the future takes us, you can count on APA to be by your side. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Silvia Vargas, FAICP. Silvia will moderate a question and answer session with Kurt and I based on what you and your colleagues are asking. Silvia?
Thanks, Joel. It's such a privilege to be with you two this morning. I can't tell you how excited I am to participate in the first digital NPC. I anticipate many thought-provoking conversations occurring throughout the conference and beyond. Before we dive into our own discussion, I want to acknowledge that we probably won't be able to finish in the short time that we have here. For all of you watching, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your comments and questions as we go along. We're going to collect those and address them later this afternoon in a special networking session at 4:45 p.m. Central Time, where Joel, Kurt, and I will be happy to continue our conversation. So let's get started. The first question: during and after the Great Recession of 2008-2009, many public sector planners lost jobs when local government revenue came up short. Municipalities are now bracing for the fiscal impact of COVID-19 as sales and gasoline tax revenues nosedive, and even property tax receipts are expected to be delayed. Kurt, let me start with you. What can be done to ensure that planners aren't once again first on the chopping block when it comes time for budget cuts?
Thanks, Sylvia. That's a great question. You know, I've given a lot of thought about this, and one of the things that key to us surviving this time through budget cuts is to show how essential planners really are. You know, one of the things, and I'd like to share with you a couple of things that I think right off the bat kind of convey that. You know, a lot of times when development slows down, the finger's pointed at planners, that our processes are too complex, too long. So this is the time now to start to look at those processes and see how we can speed things up without sacrificing public health and safety. It's a time to look at streamlining and trying to move forward so that we can move quickly when the pandemic ends and businesses want to start coming in and restarting. Second thing is, in this time of need, we've become very apparent that the way we conduct public engagement and the way that we do public meetings needs to change. We've tried to pivot very quickly and do Zoom meetings and other platforms for public hearings that can be done at home. But we also need to remember that sometimes this disenfranchises our most vulnerable communities, people of color, people of different socio-economic backgrounds. So we need to take a stronger look at how we do that. I think another thing that needs to happen is that we need to start looking at our codes on how we design buildings and how we establish public space, private and public open space within our projects. You know, things like seating capacities and parking standards and housing units and private open space for people to enjoy. And then finally, I think we need to look at existing programs, programs that might be out there that we can tap into to help our businesses come back online, whether that be facade improvement programs or some kind of redevelopment incentives to get businesses to come back in, because a lot of our businesses will be starting from ground zero after this terrible pandemic. We need to be included in not only the recovery, but we also need to be included in the preparing and the strategies for how to deal with this. And I think later on today, there'll be a session on Resilient Houston, the 101st resilient city. And they've already looked at and started to develop strategies for pandemic. So I think that will be a great session to look into. So becoming more sustainable and resilient. And those are just some quick thoughts that I have.
Great, thank you. Kurt, Joel, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure, thanks, Sylvia. Just building on what Kurt had just said, you know, I think many of us were around during the Great Recession, and certainly there are parallels in every recession, but this is different. This is really different. The two consensus priorities among society, if there are any, is that until there's widespread immunity, the two priorities are going to be to flatten the curve and to sustain that and to restart the economy. And of course, the two are related. And what we're seeing across all occupations is that those that are being, occupations, I would say, are being viewed in light of how they can serve those really immediate urgent goals. But no question that states and municipalities are already looking at substantial reductions, and planners are understandably concerned about that. So how can APA help you and help planning stay strong when money gets tight? A couple of things, certainly not an exhaustive list. First of all, we really can help by advocating on your behalf in Washington, D.C., so that planning is included in federal aid, stimulus, and when the time comes, infrastructure legislation. We can also help planners to understand how these programs work. Some of them are very complicated and confusing. And obviously this is critically important given the state of local budgets, services, and ultimately staffing levels. We can also work to help planners upskill. This is a time to be learning and adding new competencies, particularly those in the technology area. Those tools are quickly becoming essential during and certainly post-pandemic. We will continue to bring you resources that you'll need to do what we might refer to as contactless or low contact planning, and help you do more with less, because that will be a reality for a while. I know Sylvia is going to mention a couple of these in just a minute. And finally, we can provide opportunities like this, like NPC at Home, to connect really great people and great ideas during times when we can't meet face to face. So just like you, APA is going to need to pivot and adapt. And it's likely that we as an organization will have to make a number of shifts over the next couple of years. But like you, we'll do what we need to do to make sure that planners and APA stay strong and that we're looking forward to recovery.
Great, thank you, Joel. It's great to know that APA has our back. As Joel mentioned, if we can go to the next slide, please. As we all recognize the evolving circumstances around us, here are a handful of resources available from APA right now that will help, from a new knowledge base for online public engagement to practical tools for planning practice and policy. Dig into these materials regularly as they are updated in real time, and let's be willing to introduce proactive ideas that demonstrate our relevance and our problem-solving potential. So for the next question, I'd like to turn to the topic of planning in a crisis. Traditionally, planners are less involved in the emergency management side of things and more involved in the recovery phase. Since we're looking at an extended crisis period spread over the entire world, what kind of role do you both see for planners as we look to flatten the curve and restart the economy? Let's start with you again, Kurt.
Well, I think that you know, one of the things that we need to do is we need to be kind of a global community. We can learn lessons from all over the world. We're seeing things that are happening differently in other places. And I think that, you know, as I said before, being sustainable and resilient is key to us recovering. And there are great examples of sustainability plans and resilient plans out there. Like I said before, my good friend Marissa Aho out of Houston will be doing a session this afternoon on Houston's resiliency plan, where I think they will be starting to share with you their strategy on pandemics. And I also think that as planners, you know, in the various types of planners that we can also help community development and housing issues, economic development and the economic development planners who might be able to share knowledge and information about how we can restart. You know, we can learn lessons from the disasters that we've seen. While it's not in one specific geographical area, now it's all over the world. We can look to recovery efforts on hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and fires, and use that information to help us figure out how to navigate these difficult times. It's not necessarily having to reinvent the wheel, but in some cases we're going to have to reinvent that wheel. But there are a lot of things out there that we can already point to and look at and grab onto and move with. This is a time for us to test things out, small tests, so that we know that, you know, we won't fail big. This is a time to take a chance to reimagine what planning is, and reimagine what our communities will look like. But also remembering always to keep in mind that whole equity and diversity and inclusion aspect of this profession. You know, we are the great conveners. We're the people that bring everybody to the table, and that's what we're excellent at. And we need to step into that role and be the leaders of getting people together and sharing knowledge and information around the world and within our communities.
That's great. Joel, how can APA help us with that monumental task?
Yes, that I would agree. The challenges that society's facing are really, really complex and pervasive. It's not just in one community or one area, it's all over the world, as Kurt indicated, and we need to draw on. And fortunately, we have great partnerships with the international community. In fact, I know Kurt in his closing remarks is going to talk about, just to demonstrate that, going to introduce kind of a joint project that is related to the challenge. We don't really know what the full scope of the changes that we're going to see over the next few years, and so learning is going to become paramount. But I would say that, to use a metaphor, that the pandemic really hasn't reshuffled the deck, it scattered the deck. And I think that planners have a unique ability to reassemble that deck so that it is better than it was before. As a non-planner who has a great appreciation of planning, I would say that, you know, planners see the big picture, that you are excellent at synthesizing information and lots of varied perspectives and balancing competing needs. Really, planners, I think, are principled and pragmatic both at the same time. These are really your superpowers, as they say, and I think that now you have an opportunity to find a new way to use them, and Kurt, I think, pointed out a few, to address the existential challenges that we face. Planners, speaking of multidisciplinary work, planners have always been multidisciplinary, and really now's the time to double down on that, to think creatively about who we need to engage or re-engage. Public health, certainly. Perhaps we should also be more expansive and look to the drivers of the economic restart. Who are they? Maybe we should take more of an ecosystem view. And this is something that, Silvia, to your point, that APA with its foresight practice is really, and certainly in the research area, is looking at very hard. Bottom line is that, the pandemic could at once be the greatest challenge in the history of the profession and the greatest opportunity. If the profession is able to seize the opportunity to reinvent itself as a profession that helped produce a safe, equitable, and sustainable economic revival, and that would be a great legacy. And as I said, and Kurt, APA will be by your side as we look to do that together.
And Silvia, I think one of the things that we need to look at and examine more closely is this whole idea of equity and diversity and inclusion. When we're talking about public engagement and we're talking about getting information and news about what's going on in the world, there's still a broadband issue within this country, an infrastructure issue that can be solved. And it's not just about the populations of color. It's not just about urban versus suburban versus rural. And it's not just about economics, you know, the rich and the poor and those in the middle. You know, I was at a conference earlier in early March, just before we had our stay-at-home orders. Joel and I were in Nebraska, and they were talking about that there are places in Nebraska where there is no cell service, there is no broadband. And, you know, in today's society, that's just unacceptable. You know, to be able to provide people an opportunity to do this, to engage, to see public hearings, to gather news and facts, and all of that is really important. So I think you, as the chair of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity Committee, probably can share some pretty interesting things in that realm of how we need to do what we need to do about this in the equity side.
Sure. Can we move to the next slide just real quick before I get into that question? Kurt and I think Joel as well mentioned the session later today about pandemic-related considerations that were incorporated into Houston's new resilience plan. Also, please listen to the keynotes tomorrow and Friday for sobering but also refreshing insights from other planning and community leaders about this topic. And I think it was Joel who mentioned APA's ability to help us with the advocacy side. And of course, we have our advocacy network to help us stay involved in state and federal outreach that impacts in the work we do every day. So to jump right into the topic of equity, which of course is dear to my heart, it is true, both the pandemic and the response to it have heightened inequities that we have known existed for a long time. But the crisis has also exacerbated the previous gaps, as well as revealed troubling new disparities. I think all of us know, and you mentioned this, Kurt, that the crisis is having a disproportionate impact on vulnerable groups, many of which actually overlap, including the low-income populations, elderly, immigrants, people of color, rural communities. So I think a heightened focus on health equity, including mental health, is one of the areas where planners could and should work in partnership with health and public health related professions. Another issue which has become apparent, which you both were talking about in the past couple of months, is the need to address inequities in not only in access to community-focused digital infrastructure, but also digital literacy. Because that's as an issue, maybe not so much with the younger generations who live on phones where they have them, but with other groups. Even though at the same time, the switch to online meetings has also opened up engagement opportunities for other populations that typically are underrepresented in community conversations about planning, such as younger adults and parents. Another interesting example is what's being called the gendered dimension of COVID-19, dealing with all the emerging evidence that in lockdown, women across every walk of life are shouldering the brunt of the pandemic as they try to keep up with remote work, domestic responsibilities, homeschooling, childcare and elder care, with the specific concerns that also come with that. Many of these women may not even be able to return to work when the economy reopens if schools remain closed. Women also disproportionately hold jobs that don't offer protections like paid leave, which are in industries particularly threatened by the shutdown, such as service workers at restaurants, hotels, etc. And women also make up a higher percentage of healthcare workers around the world. And as you mentioned, Kurt, none of these issues are just US issues, they're global problems. So maybe this calls for a coordinated strategy with international planning organizations and other partners. But I could be talking about this topic all day. So let me turn it to you both real quick for your comments on this topic.
You know, I think this is a great time for us to be looking at these issues during this period of time. And as you mentioned, Silvia, you know, it shows the gaps and these widening gaps in equity and diversity. This virus is hitting our populations of color much harder than it is hitting other populations. It's hitting populations in rural or low-income areas because of healthcare. You know, this is a great time for us to start looking at trying to resolve or at least start to discuss these issues with our communities to try to come up with some kind of solutions or pathway forward so that we can stop widening this gap and starting to narrow it. You know, whether it be being able to be in a public meeting or listening to public input on a project or providing you know, park space in an area that's has no parks. You know, if you look back at the awards that we held on Sunday, you'll see two different awards that really you should go back and look at. One was City of New York's Parks Department and their initiative to increase the amount of park space in communities that have very little. And then there was another project that came in during the awards that talked about food islands. You know, during this pandemic, you know, supermarkets and fresh food is not always available to the disadvantaged communities because it's not profitable, the supermarkets say, to have supermarkets or grocery stores in those areas. So it's time for us to start looking at that as well. You know, planning is so closely tied to planning and health and issues. So I mean, this is our opportunity to start to highlight what these inequities are and try to move our path forward to narrowing that gap.
Very true. Joel, I'm going to move forward to the next slide. I want to hear your thoughts, but I want to, this is a topic we could go on all day as far as I'm concerned, and I want to invite our audience to actually continue the conversation about EDI in our EDI Focus Networking event, which is taking place later today. And of course, if you haven't already read it, everyone should download the Planning and Equity Policy Guide, check out the resources we released in our new social equity knowledge base. I would also like to recognize the work of the EDI steering and advisory committees who are currently holding their own conversations about what we need to do, what information we need to gather, what tools we can prepare to effectively help our members and our communities in this area. And finally, our APA Foundation provides scholarships to advance diversity and inclusion goals for the profession. And if you are able, please consider supporting the foundation's work. I want to jump into the next question because I think it's an important topic right now. And it's about planning as a career, and specifically about the situation that our graduating students are finding themselves in. They're entering the job market in one of the most challenging periods since the Great Recession. Kurt, how can these new professionals stay positive and engaged? And Joel, what can APA do to help navigate the next 24 months?
Well, I think that the students need to prepare themselves during this uncertain time. I mean, none of us know what's going to happen. We've already heard that some cities are starting to look at furloughs or layoffs because of revenue generation not coming in. But one thing that I will tell students is just, you know, be strong and go out and volunteer. Make sure that you stay connected with APA. You know, we're here to help you. And we have a network of 46,000 people across the country that can help you navigate this difficult time. You know, when I was running for president, in my candidate statement, I used a quote by Walt Disney. which resonates today even more so. It goes like this: times and conditions change so rapidly that we must keep our aim constantly focused on the future. Don't look at what's going on today. Think about what can happen tomorrow, and how you can be a member of the future. You know, there are job opportunities. I think I saw the Texas chapter announced that they were looking for jobs or people to do testing for the antivirus to look at how we would track and monitor this disease. That's a job is closely related to what we do in population and data and gathering. You know, the Census Bureau is going to be looking for people as well to help gather the census data from the people that have not responded yet. There are ways that are not traditional. So it might not be working in a municipality or a state or local or federal government position or even a consulting firm. It might be a non-traditional place, such as an economic development corporation or a nonprofit that has deals with affordable housing. There are so many aspects of what we do that can be translated into so many other professions. So don't despair. There are things to do. And you know, I think Silvia will talk about this in a minute, but we have a very exciting announcement about next week that really deals with this topic.
Actually, I don't know if maybe Joel wants to talk about this. Why don't we switch to the next slide, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's happening next week.
So yes, next week, I'm just going to that slide myself. So yeah, you know, APA has we are committed, as we said, to helping you to adapt to uncertain and changing times. And you know, obviously, right now, if you're a graduating student or nearing graduation, your mind is on the job market. And one of the things that we've been able to do is next week to introduce what we call the APA at Home Career Zone. And this will, it's an online virtual event. Obviously, it will happen on next Wednesday, May the 6th. From 9 to 5:30 p.m. Central Time, and you can find it on planning.org/career zone. It'll be a day-long opportunity to learn and network, and it is included with your registration here. And there is also, as you can see on the slide, a great session that you'll want to attend on Friday in the morning from 10 to 10:45 Central. So, and obviously, as Kurt mentioned, there are always jobs posted on APA website, on our job site, and that will continue to be the case over the next 2 years. The one thing I would just also add, Silvia, is sort of a philosophical thing and a very practical thing. First of all, you know, while you're coming out of school without a lot of planning experience, you have a great advantage in that you are in learning mode. And the value of learning and adapting is greater and will be greater than it's ever been in our lifetimes. And so those of us who have had many, many years of experience, while that's all helpful, what we're able to learn from here on out is even more valuable. And then finally, if you haven't considered it yet, I would consider pursuing your AICP. One of the things, I have a pretty extensive credentialing and licensing background, and one of the things that we've seen year after year and through recessions is that having a credential, respected credential like AICP, is a valuable asset in a recession. So, and it's also might be a good, you might have a time to do it as well. So just a couple of thoughts, Silvia.
Those are great advice. And by the way, thank you for plugging my session on Friday. We're very excited to be bringing this topic, which is a topic that was on the original program before we knew this was going to happen. It seems more relevant now. We're going to be talking about how to make the transition to gig-based work. And I think that this is one of the ways in which we can start thinking sort of out of the box about what what the work of a planner can be.
Yep.
So I think that I'm just getting our time check.
Thumbs up. Yep, it's about that
Turn it
time.
over to you.
Yes,
Kurt?
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Sylvia and Joel. I just want to remind everyone out there that you don't have to sit behind your Zoom or your computer for the 3 straight days. You will have access to all of these sessions for 1 year as part of your registration fee. You're one of 5,000 people that have that ability. So I just want to thank you, Sylvia and Joel, for sharing this time with me, and thanks to everyone online. I hope this discussion has resonated with you and that it inspires your next steps in this conference and beyond. As we close, I'll leave you with this one question. This is a collective project of the planning institutes around the world to help focus our learning with the future and address this global crisis. Every nation's planning community is anxious about the future and wants to better understand what can be done over the next couple of years to ensure that planning remains relevant and helps solve new problems that have been created or exacerbated by the pandemic. Planning institutes across the world will be asking their members this question and will be sharing the results. Before this conference experience ends, I hope you can give this some thought and share your answer with us. For those of you who are interested in continuing the discussion, join us this afternoon at 4:45, where Joel, myself, and Sylvia will be for the focus networking sessions. There'll be a series of networking sessions that you'll be able to participate in at the end of each day. I highly recommend that you take part in these. You'll be able to connect with your colleagues all over the country and all over the world, as we have international people on these part of our registration. And thanks again. And remember, no matter where the future takes us, you can count on APA to be at your side. Thank you for joining. I'm really excited about the beginning of this conference and enjoy what we've put together for you. Thank you.